Evelyn Marsh's disappearance shattered the peaceful illusion of Whitbourne, turning a quiet English town into the center of one of the most disturbing investigations in UK history, and uncovering the monstrous secrets of a man named Malcolm Howell, whose obsession with preserving innocence revealed horrors no one could have imagined. Please subscribe for daily new update of Crime Story and watch till end. Whitbourne had always been the kind of English town that seemed frozen in time, a quiet corner of the countryside where nothing ever truly went wrong. Old stone cottages lined the narrow streets. Church bells rang every Sunday morning, and everyone knew their neighbors. It was the kind of place where people left their front doors unlocked, and gossip traveled faster than the wind. But on a cold December evening in 2016, that sense of safety was torn apart forever. Evelyn Marsh, a 24-year-old nursery teacher, vanished without a trace. And with her disappearance, the town's calm began to crumble piece by piece. Evelyn was well loved by everyone who knew her. She had grown up in Whitbourne, gone to school there, and returned after college to work at Little Meadow Nursery. Parents trusted her, children adored her, and her gentle nature made her instantly likable. On the night she disappeared, she had finished her shift at the nursery just after sunset. A coworker remembered seeing her smile and wave goodbye before getting into her small blue car. It was supposed to be a short drive home, less than 10 minutes. But somewhere along that route, something went terribly wrong. When Evelyn didn't arrive at work the next morning, her absence raised immediate concern. She was responsible and never late, not even once. By noon, her friends had called her family, who quickly reported her missing. Police began tracing her last movements, and within hours, they located her car abandoned on a narrow road leading to Bramble Woods, an isolated stretch known for its twisting paths and eerie silence. The discovery sent a chill through the search team. The car's engine was still running, headlights on, as if she had only stepped out for a moment. Her handbag and phone were untouched inside, along with her coat, suggesting she hadn't planned to go far. Investigators found no footprints leading away from the car, only the marks of her tires on the damp road. A light drizzle had fallen overnight, washing away any potential traces of movement. The scene looked almost staged, too clean, too quiet. As police examined the surroundings, they noticed the woods just beyond the road, dark and dense, stretching for miles. They feared Evelyn had wandered into them, but why? And if she had, how had she disappeared so completely? Over the next several days, hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Helicopters scanned the area, dogs were brought in, and divers searched nearby rivers and ponds. Nothing was found. Reporters arrived from across the country, turning the case into a national mystery. For such a small town, the sudden attention was overwhelming. Strangers filled the streets, and residents whispered theories over tea. Some believed Evelyn had been kidnapped. Others said she might have run away, though no one could explain why. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The people of Whitbourne started locking their doors for the first time in decades. The friendly smiles vanished, replaced by suspicion and fear. Everyone wondered who could have taken Evelyn, and worse, was the person still among them, pretending to be normal while hiding something unspeakable? Detectives from nearby Worcester were brought in to help with the investigation, determined to uncover what had happened to Evelyn Marsh. They started by retracing her last known steps. CCTV cameras in town showed her stopping briefly at a small convenience store after work, buying a carton of milk and a snack. She looked calm, unaware that these would be the final moments she'd ever be seen alive. The footage showed her leaving the shop and driving towards the road that led to Bramble Woods. But after that, she seemed to vanish from every lens. The police checked every nearby camera, every petrol station, every traffic post. There was no sign of her or her car until it was found hours later on that lonely country lane. The discovery of her car presented more questions than answers. Forensics examined the vehicle inside and out, but found no fingerprints other than Evelyn's own. Her phone showed no missed calls or messages, and her last online activity was at 6:48 p.m., when she opened a photo of her class at the nursery. Nothing about her life suggested she wanted to disappear. She had no debts, no arguments with friends or family, and no secret relationships. Her world was small but happy. That was what made her disappearance so deeply unsettling. There was no reason for it. As days passed, the search expanded. Police dogs picked up a faint scent trail leading into Bramble Woods, but lost it a few hundred meters in. The forest was old, dense, and tangled, with uneven ground and hidden ditches. The deeper they went, the more uneasy the search teams felt. Locals often spoke of the woods as cursed, claiming strange things happened there. Animals going missing, lights flickering at night, faint cries that no one could explain. Most brushed it off as folklore, but as Evelyn's case dragged on, the stories returned, whispered in frightened tones. 3 days into the search, a volunteer found something strange about 2 miles inside the forest. Half buried under damp leaves was a single child's shoe, faded and small, far too little to belong to Evelyn. Forensics confirmed it was unrelated to any known missing child, yet it was clearly placed, not dropped. It raised new fears that perhaps someone had used the woods before to hide something or someone. The area was sealed off, and cadaver dogs were brought in, but again they found nothing. No blood, no clothing, no trace of Evelyn. Rumors began spreading around town. Some believed Evelyn had been lured into the woods by someone she trusted. Others suspected a stranger passing through, though police found no evidence of an outsider. Then came a strange detail. A local delivery driver reported seeing a flicker of light in the woods around the same time. Evelyn disappeared, as if from a lantern or a small fire. Investigators dismissed it at first, assuming it was campers, but when they checked, there was no sign anyone had been camping in that area for months. It was as if Evelyn had stepped into the forest that night and been swallowed whole by it. 2 weeks after Evelyn's disappearance, the case had turned cold. Search teams had covered every field, riverbank, and patch of woodland within 10 miles of Whitbourne, yet not a single solid clue had been found. The police were under pressure, the town was restless, and Evelyn's family was falling apart. Then, just as the search was beginning to wind down, a local farmer named Harold Briggs called the police with something strange. He lived on the outskirts of town, near the edge of Bramble Woods, and claimed that a few nights earlier he had heard screams echoing through the fields close to an old farmhouse that had been abandoned for decades. At first, he thought it was foxes or night animals, but the noise had sounded too human, too desperate. Officers were immediately dispatched to investigate. The farmhouse sat deep within a patch of overgrown land, half hidden behind trees and tall weeds. Its windows were shattered, its roof sagging, and ivy crawled over the stone walls like veins. Inside, the air was thick with dust and rot. They expected to find nothing but decay, but in the basement, torchlight revealed something that made every officer freeze. The room was small, cold, and lined with crumbling brick. In one corner lay a pile of personal belongings, bracelets, torn pieces of fabric, old shoes, and a hairbrush. Among them was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the initials E.M., Evelyn Marsh. The scene was immediately sealed off. Forensics swept through every inch of the house, collecting samples, testing for fingerprints, and examining the items found. The discovery reignited the investigation. Detectives believed they had finally found where Evelyn had been taken, or at least held. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it became. The house had no power, no running water, and no recent signs of habitation. There were no footprints on the dusty floors, except for the officer's own. Whoever had used the basement had done so carefully, leaving little trace. Investigators checked ownership records for the property. It had once belonged to a man named Victor Hawley, a local architect who had disappeared years earlier after being accused of assault. He was believed to have died in 2005, but the records were vague and incomplete. Some said he drowned in a boating accident. Others claimed he'd simply left the country. But now, with Evelyn's bracelet turning up in a house linked to him, everything was back under question. As the forensic teams continued searching, they made another chilling discovery behind a loose wall panel, several newspaper clippings from the 1990s, all about missing women from nearby towns. It appeared someone had been following those cases closely, cutting out every article and storing them like trophies. The farmhouse was now considered a major crime scene, but when detectives canvassed the area, no one could recall seeing anyone near the property for years. It stood there, silent and forgotten, hiding. Detectives focused their attention on the man connected to the farmhouse, Victor Hall. His name had been buried in old records, almost forgotten, but his history was darker than anyone in Whitbourne had imagined. In the late 1990s, Victor had been a well-known architect, designing several public buildings across the region. On the surface, he was successful, respected, and charming. But beneath that reputation lay a series of accusations that had never been proven. 3 women had come forward claiming he had attacked them, though each case mysteriously fell apart before trial. One of the victims vanished completely before she could testify, and within months, Victor left his home and was never seen again. Officially, he was declared dead after a supposed boating accident, but no body had ever been recovered. Now, nearly 2 decades later, a basement filled with women's belongings was discovered in a house that once belonged to him. The coincidence was too great to ignore. The investigation widened, and detectives began searching for any living relatives of Victor Hall. That's when they uncovered the name Malcolm Hawley, his younger brother. Unlike Victor, Malcolm had stayed in Whitbourne, living quietly in a small cottage on the edge of town. He had no wife, no children, and almost no friends. Locals described him as reclusive but harmless, a man who kept to himself and rarely spoke to anyone. He worked odd jobs, mostly handyman work, and was known to disappear for days at a time. When officers visited his property for questioning, he greeted them calmly, denying any knowledge of the farmhouse or Evelyn Marsh. Still, something about his detached demeanor unsettled the detectives. While investigators checked his background, forensic teams made another discovery at the farmhouse. Hidden behind a broken fireplace was a small metal box containing letters and sketches. The sketches depicted women's faces, drawn with obsessive detail, each one different, but all hauntingly lifelike. One of the faces resembled Evelyn. The letters were worse, short, fragmented notes written in uneven handwriting that seemed to describe keeping them safe and preserving innocence. Though they weren't signed, the writing style matched Malcolm's old records from school. A comparison of fingerprints from the box confirmed that Malcolm Hale's prints were present, not Victor's. The police now believed that while Victor may have been the original owner of the property, Malcolm had been using it long after his brother's disappearance. This revelation changed everything. The theory that Victor had faked his death or disappeared was replaced by a darker possibility that Malcolm had taken over his brother's identity, using the farmhouse as a hidden refuge for his crimes. Detectives obtained a warrant and searched Malcolm's cottage again, this time thoroughly. What they found deepened the horror. In his attic were old photos of women cut from newspapers, each labeled with a date and location. Some of the women had been reported missing years earlier. It became clear that Evelyn's disappearance was not an isolated case. It was part of a pattern that stretched back years, maybe decades. The town of Whitbourne was no longer dealing with a mystery. It was facing a monster who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The raid on Malcolm Hale's property began early in the morning, with a quiet but tense air surrounding the operation. Officers moved through the overgrown garden, where rusted tools and animal bones lay scattered across the ground. The cottage itself looked abandoned, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. Yet inside, it told a different story, one that revealed a life shrouded in obsession and cruelty. Every room was filled with clutter, old photographs, and strange collections of everyday items. But it was the basement that froze everyone in their tracks. Hidden beneath a trapdoor under a worn rug was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. When the first officer descended, his flashlight caught the glint of metal shelves lined with glass jars, each one labeled with a name and a date. Inside them were strands of hair, jewelry, and personal belongings from missing women. In one corner of the basement, detectives discovered a map pinned to the wall, dotted with red circles across various parts of Whitbourne and nearby towns. Each circle corresponded to a woman who had disappeared over the past 10 years. It was clear that Malcolm had been keeping track, marking his victims like trophies. Beneath the map was a set of old, hand-drawn blueprints showing underground tunnels stretching from his cottage to other properties, including the abandoned farmhouse. The realization that these tunnels had been used to move between locations unseen was terrifying. It explained how Malcolm had evaded suspicion for so long, slipping in and out of buildings under the cover of night, never once being spotted. Further exploration revealed a narrow passage behind the basement wall. The air inside was cold and damp, the walls rough and unfinished. The tunnel stretched for hundreds of feet before ending beneath the farmhouse, discovered weeks earlier. Along the way, investigators found discarded objects, torn fabric, an old shoe, and a small children's doll. Each item seemed deliberately placed, as though Malcolm had wanted to leave traces for someone to find, like pieces of a twisted puzzle. Near the tunnel's end, a small wooden crate held Evelyn Marsh's jacket, neatly folded as if preserved. Her work ID badge was placed beside it, spotless and clean, an eerie sign of care from the man who had taken her. The entire discovery was documented carefully, but even the most experienced officers struggled to contain their unease. Malcolm's obsession seemed ritualistic, almost methodical. Every item was organized, every movement planned. Investigators also found a series of notebooks filled with fragmented writings, ramblings about purity, beauty, and innocence. Some pages contained sketches of women surrounded by children, suggesting a delusional fixation on capturing or preserving what he believed to be goodness. When confronted with the evidence, Malcolm remained eerily calm. He neither confirmed nor denied his involvement, sitting silently as officers read him his rights. The basement, the tunnel, and the personal belongings were enough to secure his arrest. But one thing still haunted detectives. They had yet to find Evelyn's body. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery about where she had gone. It was now about what Malcolm had done, and how many more secrets were still hidden beneath Whitbourne's quiet soil. After Malcolm Hale's arrest, the entire country turned its attention to Whitbourne. Reporters surrounded the small police station, cameras flashing as officers escorted the quiet, pale man inside. Malcolm said nothing, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. He sat motionless in the interrogation room, his expression distant, as if detached from reality. Detectives questioned him for hours, but every attempt to make him talk failed. He didn't request a lawyer, didn't ask for food or water, and didn't respond when shown photographs of Evelyn Marsh or the other missing women. It was as if he had shut himself off from the world completely. While he remained silent, investigators dug into his background. What they uncovered painted a chilling picture. Malcolm had grown up in the same farmhouse where the women's belongings were found. His father, Thomas Hall, was a violent man with a reputation for cruelty. Neighbors recalled hearing shouting from the property almost every night during the boy's childhood. Their mother had died mysteriously when Malcolm was only 8 years old, and the official cause had been listed as an accident, though many believed otherwise. After her death, the Halley brothers were isolated, rarely attending school and spending most of their time alone on the property. The darkness in that family seemed to run deep. Records revealed that Malcolm had been institutionalized at the age of 16 after an incident at school where he attacked another student with a broken bottle. He was diagnosed with severe behavioral disorders and was kept under psychiatric care for nearly a decade. In 2002, he was released under strict supervision after being deemed rehabilitated. Over time, his check-ins with mental health officers became less frequent until they stopped altogether. No one noticed when he withdrew completely from society. He had learned to blend into the background, surviving quietly while hiding his true nature. Forensic experts examined the evidence found at his property. The notebooks filled with disturbed writings suggested an obsession with control and preservation. One disturbing entry read, "They fade when they leave. Only I can keep them as they were." Psychologists interpreted it as an attempt to justify his acts. He saw himself not as a killer, but as someone preserving what he viewed as purity. The collection of hair, jewelry, and personal items wasn't random. It was part of his twisted way of remembering them. Meanwhile, officers searched the surrounding land, digging through areas marked on Malcolm's maps. They found several shallow pits containing animal remains, perhaps practice graves, but no sign of human remains. The press dubbed him the Whitbourne Collector, and the nickname spread across the country. Still, despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, the one thing that mattered most was missing: Evelyn Marsh's body. Without it, the case couldn't be officially classified as murder. Investigators feared that without a confession or physical proof of her death, Malcolm could manipulate the system and escape a full conviction. Yet deep down, every officer knew the truth: Evelyn wasn't missing anymore. She was somewhere in the ground. Malcolm Halley knew better than anyone. They just hadn't found her yet. Months had passed since Malcolm Hale's arrest, and the investigation into Evelyn Marsh's disappearance had reached a painful standstill. Though the evidence against him was overwhelming: her belongings, his maps, the journals, there was still no physical proof of her death. Without a body, the prosecution struggled to move forward. Public outrage was growing, and the people of Whitbourne demanded justice. Police continued searching every location Malcolm had marked on his maps, hoping to find the final missing piece that would close the case forever. But every excavation led to disappointment. Nothing but dirt, broken glass, and old animal bones. The unanswered question haunted everyone: where had Malcolm hidden her? Then, one spring morning, a group of construction workers made a grim discovery while repairing flood barriers near the River Thames, only a few miles from the farmhouse. As they dug through the damp soil, one of the workers' shovels struck wood. At first, they thought it was an old crate, but when they pried it open, the smell told them otherwise. Inside was a wooden chest, tightly sealed and wrapped in layers of plastic. Police were called immediately, and the site was cordoned off within minutes. Forensic teams arrived and carefully removed the contents. Inside the chest were bones, strands of blonde hair, and fragments of clothing later identified as Evelyn Marsh's. Alongside her remains were two more sets of bones, two other women who had never been identified. Each had been carefully wrapped and buried with a small children's toy. The chilling detail matched what had been found in Malcolm's basement, confirming that the dolls symbolized his fixation on childhood and purity. The discovery horrified the entire country. Forensic experts worked tirelessly to extract DNA, confirming that Evelyn had been strangled to death. The two other victims were later linked to missing persons cases from nearby towns, both women in their 20s who had disappeared years apart. It became clear that Malcolm Hale's crimes had spanned far longer than anyone had suspected. He wasn't just a disturbed man who acted on impulse. He had been killing methodically, choosing victims who fit a specific pattern: young, kind-hearted women with nurturing professions, teachers, caretakers, and nurses, all women who reminded him of innocence, something he believed he needed to preserve. The recovery of the bodies finally allowed prosecutors to charge him with multiple counts of murder. Evidence tied every crime back to Malcolm, from fingerprints to the DNA found in his basement. His journals described the act of keeping them close, a twisted phrase that investigators now understood meant burying them, carefully as if he were protecting them. During the final days before trial, the case consumed the media. Reporters called it one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in modern British history. For Evelyn's family, the discovery brought a painful mixture of relief and devastation. They finally had answers, but they also had to confront the horrifying truth of what had been done to her. The quiet town of Whitbourne, once known for its peace and beauty, had become a symbol of hidden darkness. The river that had once brought calm now carried the weight of the town, his deepest secret, a place where innocence had been buried and where evil had finally been unearthed. In the months that followed the discovery near the River Thames, the case of Malcolm Hawley dominated every headline in the United Kingdom. Reporters camped outside the courthouse for days, and television channels ran documentaries about his twisted life. The nation watched in morbid fascination as the man known as the Whitbourne Collector finally faced trial. In the courtroom, Malcolm sat completely still, his face expressionless, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. The prosecution presented mountains of evidence, his journals, the map of burial sites, the personal items belonging to his victims, and the forensic proof linking him to the remains of Evelyn Marsh and 2 other women. Yet throughout the trial, he never spoke a single word. He refused to defend himself, refused to deny, and refused to explain. Psychologists testified that Malcolm's crime stemmed from a lifelong obsession with control, purity, and innocence. His childhood trauma had shaped him into a man who couldn't bear the chaos of life around him. The only way he could feel peace was by preserving what he considered beautiful and good his victims. Each one, investigators learned, had been chosen for their kindness, their patience, or their connection to children. In Malcolm's mind, he wasn't destroying them. He was saving them from corruption, freezing them in a moment of purity. His writings described the murders not as acts of violence, but as quiet gifts, words that sent chills through everyone who heard them read aloud in court. The trial lasted 5 weeks. The defense argued mental illness, but the jury saw through it. They were shown photographs of the tunnels connecting his properties, evidence of years of planning, and the cold precision of his work. This wasn't madness, it was calculation. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Malcolm Hawley was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Even then, he showed no emotion, no flicker of remorse. He was led away quietly, his head bowed, as Evelyn Marsh's family wept. After his conviction, police returned to his cottage to finish cataloging his belongings. In a locked drawer beneath his bed, they found a small leather-bound journal that had gone unnoticed before. Inside, Malcolm had written about the voices of the woods and how he felt watched by shadows that wanted their stories told. The final entry, written only days before his arrest, said, "The silence is over. They'll find her now." It seemed as though he had known the police were close, almost inviting discovery, as if the secrecy had become too heavy to carry alone. Years later, the town of Whitbourne still bore the scars of what happened. The farmhouse was demolished, and the land near the river was fenced off. A memorial bench with Evelyn's name now sits beside the nursery where she once worked, surrounded by flowers that locals replace every spring. Yet even with time, the fear never truly left. On foggy nights, when the woods fall silent and the wind drifts through the fields, people still say the air feels strange, as if the ghosts of Malcolm Hale's victims linger there, watching, reminding everyone that evil can hide anywhere, even behind the calmest smile in the quietest town.